Well, instead of making the smart decision for my finances and sanity to finish one of the myriad of projects that are half finished or barely started on my shelves, I've decided to take a crack at kit bashing a custom chapter. Trying to do it more traditional, without 3D printing, just stealing from other boxes, a little help from some aftermarket kits, and trying to get over my fear of sculpting. Without much time to finish projects or edit videos these days, I still want to record my progress each week, which I already failed at when I failed to properly record me drawing the chapter insignias. But here's the finished product, and time to start the journey. As you saw in the title, we're painting orange armor today. Unfortunately, I had to get to film my airbrush portion because there was an issue with my filming setup. But I just started with a primer of Pro Acryl Black Brown, and then that starting tone was Word Bearers Red for that kind of terracotta-ish brown orange red, then moving up to Mars Red from Army Painter for that reddish orange for midtone, and then highlighting with Squig Orange. Then I moved over to the desk to start with the normal brush. That first color I'm working with is that Squig Orange again, just kind of trying to refine those highlights that I started with the airbrush, kind of breaking up that airbrush feel. I'm also going for like a corroded rust look. That's like the main theme and why it is orange. So instead of doing these full brush strokes, I just kind of started with a stippling pattern, especially where that airbrush was hitting with the highlights. One, it's going to help that corrosive look, and two, honestly, I don't have that much finesse when it comes to highlighting. So this was just an excuse to make it look less finessed. I didn't cover this model's kit bash as it was pretty close to the Chapter Master model that I'm also building up. I plan on getting into the lore more in later videos, but all the characters are some flavor of a chaplain, and all the models will have some element of robes and drapery as well as these excess bones on the armor. So that base chaplain model was already pretty close with the skull mask and the robes. So all I really did was add some battle damage to help that corrosive feel, as one of the nicknames of this chapter is the Rustborn. They fall somewhere between Chaos and Loyalist, so a little touch of that nurgly corruption, but not all the way. The only real major change I made to this model was making his crozier into that bone staff, taking some pieces from the Flesh Eater Court's Crypt Horror model box. I continue to refine that same highlight using that same uneven stippling pattern, but then I moved to that Troll Slayer orange to get those really kind of bright centers where the light would be hitting and highlighting that rust the most. And then after I was done kind of building up the volume of that highlight, I went through and hit those highest spots as well as a little bit of edge highlighting with a mixture of Wild Rider Orange as well as Kislev Flesh. And then I kind of do all of the shading and oil washes, which do a lot of the work in this paint scheme all at once I finish blocking in those base colors. As I mentioned, this chapter will have a lot of robes and hoods and drapery, so I wanted that to be a focus of this paint scheme test. All I did was cover everything with some Rhinox hide and then built up the midtones with Mournfang Brown, and then highlighted the edges and kind of minimal folds on this model with a mixture of Darkstone and Kislev Flesh, though I'll probably just use Rakarth Flesh in the future instead of making up that mix. And then I use that same highlight mixture to paint the wrappings of that club. I didn't want these models to become just a full blob of orange, so instead of painting those guns the orange as well, I went for more of a dirty black metal look. So over black, I just dry brushed or highlighted on the smaller parts with some Ushapti bone. But I'm still going to go back and add some rust, so once I was done with that highlighting and dry brushing, I took some dry rust from Army Painter and just kind of stippled that on very loosely, so it still pulled that dirty feel with a little bit of rust instead of that full orange look. This chapter is a Dark Angels conversion, so it has that kind of knightly order vibe, but instead it is this kind of penitent order in these dark robes They also have a little bit of that like coral theme as the Battle Sisters do. But it is also a mixture of kind of Night Lords. So there will be a lot of bones on these models, even more than normal Warhammer models, which is saying a lot. So that being said, I have 2 bone recipes. First is your classic Xandru dust, highlighted with Ushapti and Screaming Skull. Then the second is based in necrotic flesh from Army Painter, so it's a little bit cooler. The more refined and decorative bones have that first scheme, and the accessory bones have that cooler theme. And then this model doesn't have it as much, but it does have some smoke, but a lot of my models will have that smoke. So I just kind of built up a gray gradient on it, as well as highlighting the tips with pallid witch flesh. I then moved on to the workhorse of this scheme, which is oil washes. I started by adding some thin pin washes of burnt sienna on the armor, and then used a fatter wash of burnt umber on the bones. I waited for that fat wash to dry for about 15 minutes before wiping it off, so it gave it that grimy feel as well as hitting those recesses. I also used some dust oil paint as a glaze on the robes to make it look kind of salt stained and dirty, especially along the hems. And then lastly, or not lastly, but before I did my final wash, I tested out a turquoise wash or turquoise glaze on those big wing bones on his halo, as that's one of the chapter symbols. So I wanted to kind of stand out, maybe feel a little bit warp touched, but I'm unsure if I will keep that portion for later models because I'm not really happy with how it turned out. And then that final wash was Starship Filth, which I just used for that real dark gray shading in the recesses. Once it was all dry, once again, I kind of rubbed everything off with the Q-tip, really letting those flat areas kind of be cleaned off of that oil wash. But I didn't really go back with mineral spirits and remove any of the washes because I really wanted to stick to that grimy, dirty feel. Some of the more decorative metal pieces I had based in dark bronze, so here I'm just highlighting with bright gold sparingly to give that tarnished gold feel. I then also took some bright jade to give it a little bit of a verdigris feel, and then added one last bit of highlighting and battle damage by sponging on some lead belcher at friction points. And then the last step was just a dot of white ink on the eyes, followed by a dot of blue fluorescent to give those eyes not only some glow, but a little bit of contrast from that orange. And then I took some glamour shots. Overall, I'm pretty happy for this first test. One big thing I want to focus on in the future is cleaning up that robe, probably breaking up some of that dust oil wash. But other than that, great first step. Thanks for following along.